Thank you very much for a fascinating lecture. My name is Alan Watson, and one of the things I do is write history. And I'm very involved with the Churchill Archives at Cambridge. My question really is this, that when you start looking at what needs to be retained, to what extent do you actually inquire what the priorities of the historian are? To give you one example, we have just had this great debate, whatever we think of the outcome, about Brexit in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
Now, we know that one email in particular played a very important part in the Brexit debate, that of Michael Gove's wife. So the question would be, if you are looking at an issue like that, what would be the digital dimension, the recoverable, retainable digital dimension of the Brexit debate?
Wow. Gee, that's so easy, my wife could answer that question. All right. Let me start out by observing that we don't always know what is important for history. I remember a meeting with a collection of librarians where we were discussing not Brexit, but the general problem of preservation for historical reasons. And some young chap got up and said, "Oh, this is not a problem. The stuff that's important, we will preserve and copy into new media, and the stuff that's not important, no one will care about." It took about a half an hour to get the librarians off the ceiling because they pointed out, as I suspect you would, sir, that sometimes you don't know that this document or this digital object is absolutely crucial to understanding a particular point in history for maybe a couple of hundred years, and then this thing becomes the key point around which history revolved. I can't resist mentioning a conversation I had with Henry Kissinger a few years ago. He told me he hated the internet, and that ended the conversation. And I said, "Would you care to explain?" He said, "Well, people have become happy and satisfied with 2 paragraphs of response. I write 700-page books." And so he was unhappy with the fact that people were becoming satisfied with much too little and not enough depth, and I suspect that you would agree with that. The final point I would make is that so many times I have found that materials have been preserved purely by accident. The sequences are unbelievable, finding the scrolls in the desert, for example. How about the Archimedes palimpsest, which was written in 1000 AD on vellum, kept for 200 years in Jerusalem in the monastery where it was written. These were copies of Archimedean manuscripts. In 1200 AD, the abbot of the monastery decided that the vellum was more valuable than that which was written on it, and proceeded to scrub as much of the Greek as possible off of this manuscript, rotated it 90 degrees and cut it in half, and then proceeded to write the owner's manual for the monastery in Greek on this thing. So now you had these sheets which had Archimedean material going this way on both sides, and the owner's manual going this way on both sides. And then it was kept in the monastery until 1900, and then it disappeared. And in 1998, it was discovered in a Frenchman's attic in Paris. He had gotten the manuscript somehow, I don't know how, and in the 30s was trying to sell it. He happened to be Jewish, and he was trying to get out of town before the Germans showed up. And he didn't succeed in getting anyone to buy this owner's manual. So then he went to an artist and said, "Well, can you put some icon images on a few of the pages to enhance the value of this thing?" It didn't improve things at all. And so it ended up in his attic. And by the time it was found, it was, had mold growing on it, and it had become warped and everything else. A good friend of mine purchased this manuscript, sight unseen, for about $1.5 million, and brought it to the Walters Library or Walters Museum in Baltimore, California, which specializes in the preservation of old manuscripts. Well, to make a long story short, they were able to retrieve a substantial amount of the palimpsest. And what was truly amazing is that one of the Archimedean texts was about infinitesimals, which, as many of you will know, is the basis for calculus. This means that Archimedes in 300 BC was infinitesimally close to calculus. And it only took 2,000 more years before your Isaac Newton reinvented the idea. So, I mean, I do not want that to be the way in which history is preserved. And so people will say, well, you can't preserve everything. And I say, yes, I agree with you, I cannot preserve everything. But if you had something you thought deserved preservation, you should have the means to do that. I want that technology to be in our hands. And I want the underlying sustainability of it to be available, even though I know we can't preserve everything. So that doesn't quite get to the Brexit question, does it? I managed to sidestep a lot of that by invoking Archimedes and everything else. I suspect people looking back, I mean, I think many of us are still scratching our heads about this, people looking back will want to know what happened, how it happened, what the rationales were. And so, indeed, I do believe this is an important moment that does deserve preservation somehow.